I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Dick Durbin reacted to the two public January 6th committee hearings on the Senate floor Tuesday. The majority whip called the revelations from the hearings, quote, so damning. The committee used its second hearing on Monday to show how former President Donald Trump ignored advice from top aides and officials that his claims of a stolen election were false. Take a listen to hear Durbin highlight the hearings.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Are we in quorum call?
Yes, we are.
I ask consent to be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, hard to believe it was 50 years ago this week. 50 years ago when 5 men were caught breaking into the offices of the Democratic National Committee here in Washington. 2 years after that, the so-called Watergate break-in and the cover-up by the Nixon White House, it brought down the president. For nearly a half a century, the Watergate scandal really ranked as America's greatest constitutional test since the Civil War. Then came January 6, 2021. An angry mob, summoned by a defeated president, attacked this Capitol building, attacked this chamber. And those of us who were in it knew it was an attempt to overthrow an election which Donald Trump lost but never admitted. How did we respond? Well, the proposal was made, the right proposal, to create a bipartisan commission to investigate what happened on January 6, 2021. Unfortunately, the Republicans, led by Senator McConnell in the Senate, filibustered the creation of an independent commission to investigate January 6. Fortunately, the House went forward to proceed on its own, on a bipartisan basis, to get to the truth. Now, after 11 months and 1,000 interviews, more than 1,000, the Bipartisan Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol is sharing its findings with America. And the revelations are so damning. In its first 2 public hearings, the committee has shown that the attack on the Capitol was not a demonstration that changed spontaneously and became a riot. The attack on our nation's capital, the attack on this chamber, was the result of a plan, a violent effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, to stop the peaceful transition of power in America for the first time in our history. To quote Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the former President Donald Trump, quote, summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. When the mob beat our police officers and ransacked the Capitol, going through our desks here on the floor, posing for pictures where the presiding officer is now standing. All sorts of things to make them look famous with their friends at the expense of the integrity of this building and this chamber. They beat the police officers. Donald Trump did nothing to stop them. Nothing. He wouldn't order the National Guard to defend the Capitol, the Senate, the House. He watched the mayhem on TV, rewinding it to watch it over and over again. He gloried in the moment. When the crowd threatened to hang Vice President Pence, Donald Trump said, and I quote, he deserves it. Deserves it. The Vice President of the United States deserves it. His own advisors told him repeatedly that the voter fraud conspiracy theories that he was peddling were false. They were called idiotic, amateurish, detached from reality. Who said that? The former Attorney General serving Donald Trump said it in describing the false claims that President Trump continued to peddle. Donald Trump was told the truth over and over again, and yet he continued to push his deadly big lie. He deliberately former President of the United States deliberately undermined America's faith in our election process, to overturn the election and to hold on to power no matter what. He used the big lie to make big bucks. We learned that yesterday. $250 million in donations, including millions of dollars for an election defense fund that didn't exist. In a coming hearing, the committee will show how Donald Trump pressured the Justice Department into helping him overturn the election. I know a little bit about that. Our Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chair, documented this attempt to subvert the Justice Department in an 8-month investigation and report that we produced last fall. We produced this report in a bipartisan fashion, inviting Republican and Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee to witness the testimony of the key individuals and to ask questions themselves. We interviewed former justice officials like Jeffrey Rosen and Richard Donahue, the then acting Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General, who resisted Donald Trump's pressure to take over the Justice Department. They told us how repeatedly they informed the former president that his bogus election claims were false. They told us how Trump nevertheless asked the Justice Department to, quote, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen. And they resisted Donald Trump's plan to replace Jeffrey Rosen with the big lie lawyer, Jeffrey Clark, who wanted the Justice Department to help overturn the election. The facts that the Senate Judiciary Committee uncovered are damning. The January 6th committee will unveil those, many of their own discovery and reporting, and some that we sent to them from our testimony that we gathered in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Mr. President, we came close to losing this democracy in America on January 6th. I believe that by laying out the truth for us and for future generations, the members of the committee are performing a public service of heroic proportions. It is sad that given an opportunity of a bipartisan commission, just as we had with 9/11, that the Senate Republicans stopped it. Why? It's a question they're going to have to answer. On another topic, Mr. President, we speak often in the Senate about threats to peace and freedom around the world, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, China's brutal repression of the Uyghurs, the dismantling of democracy in Hong Kong, Nicaragua's repressive dictatorship, and more. In each of these struggles, there are some brave men and women who are prepared to risk their liberty and their lives to defend democracy and dignity. Many of them languish in prison as political prisoners. Their captors often try to torment them by telling them the world has forgotten you. No one knows you're here. Well, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen by coming to the floor of the Senate and sharing some of these stories. Today, let me tell you about a few of them. Let me start with a Russian opposition leader of remarkable courage, Vladimir Kara-Murza. He was poisoned twice by the Russian spy agency FSB, 2015 and 2017. He not only survived that, but he continued his work for a democratic Russia. He was a close friend of Senator John McCain, who asked him personally to serve as a pallbearer at his funeral. I met Mr. Kara-Murza in March, 3 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. He was living near Washington at the time with his wife and 3 children, but he told me he was going back to Russia. He had work to do. On April 11th, he was arrested in Moscow, one day after giving an interview in which he called Vladimir Putin's government a team of murderers. His wife, Evgenia Kara-Murza, also an advocate for democracy in Russia, who I expect to meet with later on this week, said, and I quote, "He's doing as well as you can do in a Russian prison that's notorious for torture, humiliation, and mistreatment." Earlier this month, the Senate unanimously passed a resolution I led with Senator Marco Rubio, calling on Russia to release Vladimir Kara-Murza immediately. along with Alexei Navalny, another Russian opposition leader, and thousands of others. Russians jailed for speaking up against repression, for even mentioning the possibility of the murderous war in Ukraine. It is time for America to stand up for Mr. Karamurza, and those like him have shown extraordinary courage. Senator Leila de Lima is a leading human rights advocate in the Philippines. She's a state senator who just passed her 5th year in jail. Here she is in her cell. Why is she in prison for 5 years? She criticized the repressive regime of President Rodrigo Duterte. From time to time, she writes to me from her prison cell. Let me share a short excerpt of a recent letter. Quote, "Warm greetings from my detention headquarters. I do not know for how long I'll remain behind bars, but there's one thing I'm sure of. My will to fight for what is right continues to be undeterred." Mr. President, recently 2 key witnesses in the sham case against Senator de Lima recanted their testimony, proving what we already know. The case against her is contrived. It is a travesty of justice. Many Filipino Americans in Illinois tell me they are deeply concerned about the accountability and democracy and its prospects in the Philippines. The incoming Marcos regime can demonstrate its commitment to a democratic Philippines by ending the harassment of journalists and making Senator de Lima's release one of its first priorities. Transfer these for just a second. Let me now turn to Saudi Arabia. Timely. I've been troubled by the human rights record of this kingdom, including the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, for which there's no real accountability yet. This year brought a bit of welcome news. Writer Raif Badawi was finally freed from prison after completing a 10-year prison sentence for dubious charges about his peaceful writings. I hope the Saudis will allow Raif the dignity of reuniting with his brave wife, Ansaf Haider, whom I met in Washington, and their 3 children now living in Canada. Badawi's lawyer, Walted Abu al-Khair, a leading human rights defender, is still in prison. He was convicted in Saudi Arabia's specialized criminal court, usually reserved for terrorists. I appeal to the Saudi government to free Walid and to allow Raif to be reunited with his family. These gestures would be particularly notable in light of President Biden's upcoming visit. Finally, let me turn to the United Arab Emirates. This is Ahmed Mansour, one of the last major human rights voices in the Emirates. Arrested in 2017 for using blog posts to advocate for reform and human rights in his nation. Convicted of charges of threatening the UAE's state security and social harmony, they sentenced him to 10 years in prison. He's been there for more than 5, at times in solitary confinement, isolated from other prisoners, no contact with his family. He's reportedly been tortured. Despite the dismal conditions of his incarceration, he remains steadfast in his commitment to human rights. He's conducted multiple hunger strikes to protest prison conditions. I appeal to the United Arab Emirates' new president, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, to take this opportunity early in his presidency to demonstrate compassion and courage by releasing Mr. Mansour. Mr. President, America's strength around the world comes not only from our military and economic might, but from the power of our values. Over the years, I've heard many political prisoners. They tell me that the support of this body, of Congress, of America, and so many others in our government sustained them through the lonely, desperate times they spent in jail for days and weeks and months and years. I'll close with the words of Vladimir Karamurza, This is from a recent op-ed he wrote for the Washington Post from his Russian prison. He wrote, "The prisoner's worst nightmare is the thought of being forgotten. I always knew how true these words were and how important were international campaigns of solidarity with prisoners of conscience. I now feel it with my own skin." To Vladimir Kara-Murza, Raif Badawi, Walid Abakar, Senator De Lima, Ahmed Mansour, I say you are not forgotten, and we will continue to advocate for your freedom. And let me also close by acknowledging that a member of my staff, Chris Holman, has really inspired me to take on this cause and works at it diligently. Our reward, an occasional political prisoner makes it to my office here in Washington. One of them from Africa presented me with basically a baton that he had made while in prison with my name on it, because he'd heard that I remembered him and spoke of him on the floor of the Senate. I'd say to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, make this part of your responsibility as a United States Senator. Find these people, these heroes who are sadly wasting away in prison, and remember them on this floor. It can make a difference. Some will be released. All will remember the fact that you stood up for them at the time of great need. Mr. President, I yield the floor.